Gabby. And I will confess here, I'm feeling some slide envy over Muriel's slides. I had a technology incident just before now where I lost all the formatting for my slides. So I, on the fly, threw a couple of slides in, but they are not formatted and they are not pretty, and it is what it is. So, you know, it wouldn't be a presentation without some sort of technology fail. But with that, I will share at least my intro slide, because everybody always has their intro slide available. Okay, so there's me. But thank you to the three speakers before me, Krishna, Cynthia, and Muriel. And thanks to organizers Daniel and Gabby. And Muriel, I had also the XKCD image that you chose in your slides too, because that one, I think everybody who's in technology feels very similarly to that one. And we legitimately had people running things under their desk in Detroit at some point. So on that, happy day after Women's Equality Day. Yesterday was Women's Equality Day. What does that mean? That means, although every day should be Women's Equality Day, we're celebrating the anniversary of, I'm going to move you guys out of my side view because I'm distracted and I'm talking to my audience that's on the side. So it was 19 years since, or it was many years since we celebrated passing the 19th Amendment and give women the right to vote. So that is one step in furthering women in the world of everything. And I said, every day should be Women's Equality Day. But let me tell you a little bit of stories about how I got into tech. And, well, hold on one second. Okay, let me give you my background here. I've got the background slide up. So I've been at Ticketmaster for 22 years now. And you say, how could you have possibly been someplace for 22 years? And if you'll note my start date, you'll have some little hilarity there because that's April Fool's Day. It's my longest running April Fool's joke ever. But what I'm going to tell you about is that Ticketmaster ate my youth. So I'm going to tell you how Ticketmaster ate my youth, how I got into technology in the first place, and basically how I'm dealing with being a woman in technology. So let me say here, my personal motivation, some of the things that keep me interested in technology and keep me trying to improve in technology, I've been on call for 25 years. As a manager, I no longer answer the inline incidents. I get called when something really goes seriously wrong and they reach out to me. So I want to make it so nobody's ever calling me. I want to make it so that I can be at a concert, and obviously in non-COVID days, be at a concert and not hear my phone and not care. I want to be out on a long run. I'm a distance runner. I want to be out 9 miles away from my car and not care that I won't be able to get back in time. I want to make it so that everything is stable, resilient, and I no longer have to concern myself with the day-to-day efforts of it. But let me give you a little background on the whole thing. Here's what I'm going to tell you here. How I got into technology, what I do at Ticketmaster, and my experience as a woman in technology. So how did I get into technology in the first place? I got into it a little bit sideways. I was going to college for journalism. It was not my original career goal. I realized that I was actually kind of good at it. I like solving problems. People would go, hey, Heather, can you help me with the printer? And all of us who've worked in technology had some sort of marriage with the printer, and it was always don't make me touch the printer again. I hate printers. But over time, I realized that I would jump in and figure it out because I liked that solving of the problems. I started picking up things like Unix books, networking books, and I was working a chargeback job. So I was basically listening to people's complaints about their as purchased on TV abdominizer and working on those. And that was a kind of hateful job. So I would sit in my car at lunch and read technology books and read and eat my greasy lunch truck sandwich and learn more and more about technology. So at one point, I decided that I did not like this career, and I reached out to a startup. I applied for a job. I convinced them that I was worthy of hiring. I didn't have any experience. I made myself stand out by saying that I had cats, and Muriel's Cats as a Service. I had cats that were named after a C programming function, a modeling language. You mentioned virtual reality. Her name was Vermal, VRML. A discontinued network operating system. So one of them was named Novell, and the C programming function had parentheses after her name. And I managed to convince them that I was interesting enough to hire for a tech job. So I started as a customer support person for a Windows game. And ironically, at this point, I had never owned a Windows machine. I had an IBM 8088, and I basically weaseled my way into working on, I think I had a Netcom account and a Caltech account, and I would telnet in there and do the necessary on the internet and learn things and work on a Unix system and so on. So basically what I did is I working on the Windows job, and they discovered that because I'd been sitting and reading the books in my car, I actually was a capable system administrator. So I started managing their Sun and SGI boxes because I had the skill there with the Unix. And then they had me take over their networking because I'd spent my time working on that. And they were able to get rid of their expensive consultants and just hire me full-time to work on being their system administrator. At one point, they decided that Windows was the way to go. It was cheaper, cost of ownership, and so on, and they could get other people to manage it. So I started converting their site to Windows. And as I said, I never had experience with Windows, but eventually I picked up the skill and helped convert them to Windows. So after that, I basically jumped between multiple startups, and I say I worked for all the evil empires. I worked for Ticketmaster now. I worked for a Microsoft service provider. I worked for a Disney as a contractor. So I worked for the mouse, and I worked for Bill Gates, and jumped around between startups, jumped around between consulting, and it never kept my interest for very long. So when I started with Ticketmaster, I actually was able to keep my interest, and I no longer had the urge to jump ship every 1 or 2 years. And why was that? Because Ticketmaster had very interesting challenges. As I say, they're not necessarily, the job doesn't change day to day, but the technology behind it changes and the specific incidents change. For example, every day we run like we're running for a Black Friday because you have 30,000 people trying to go after 2,000 tickets. So I'm interested in seeing what's next. So I'll talk about what I do at Ticketmaster currently. My current role is the Senior Director of Systems Engineering for the on-prem infrastructure. When I started here, I told you it came from startup, so I had experience in all sorts of areas. I was a Jill of all trades. I was the network admin, I was a DB administrator, I was a system administrator, I was the operations team, all on my own. But obviously when a company starts getting big, you need to start specializing. So when I started here, we had 6 web servers. We had a database server. We had a handful of backend gateways, and they fronted a homegrown operating system that runs on VAX. And VAX being a very outdated digital equipment company that we could optimize for selling best available tickets highly expediently. So at that point, I had to fight tooth and nail to get even a second set of servers to be able to serve our website. But as we grew, we were able to get more and more and more. When I started, our web servers were HP Vectra XAs that were basically desktop machines that were technically gaming machines and had better video cards than you'd ever want on a server because there would be compatibility issues and so on. We were running older version of IIS, and we were running a precursor to .NET. We were running IDC HTX. Eventually, no more fighting tooth and nail. We expanded into 3 data centers. We load balanced CDN with Akamai globally. We moved from Windows to a lap stack. And we got to a level of traffic where we would crush various vendors' gear because of the nature of what I said about Black Friday, where the traffic is very surgy and very sudden for very brief periods of time. So I would bring vendors in and say, hey, no, watch this. You don't believe that this happens, but we just crushed your network gear, or we just crushed your load balancer, or we just crushed your server that you said could handle anything. So we picked up, as I mentioned, we need to get into specialization. So we picked up a system administration team. I chose to stick with the operations side because I felt like the operations team allowed me to have my hands in a little more. But at that point, we moved towards a more siloed organization, whereas previously I could have my hands exactly in everything. We started moving to where we had a dev team, we had a QA team, we had a system administration team, we had an operations team, and we weren't able to just move smoothly. So dev would hand something to QA, as Cynthia was mentioning. Dev would hand something to QA, QA would hand it to operations, operations would deploy it, operations would need some help from the system administration team to make a change on the system. And if it broke, ops would log a bug with QA, QA would hand it off to dev, and it would go round and round and round, and it would take a really long time. The fix would get out there 2 to 3 weeks later. Dev and QA didn't have access to production. Ops didn't have root. So this didn't lend itself to agility or any sort of continuous delivery. All of the teams were at odds with one another. We weren't willing and able to accept frequent releases because if dev handed a bad release to ops, well, ops was the one who was sitting there at midnight on a Saturday night trying to repair something that they had no control to completely repair end to end. We were always scaled to peak traffic because turnaround time to build something new out was so long. So in 2011, we started our DevOps transformation. We began offering DevOps training to the developers. We granted them privileged access on the systems. We pulled the ops teams into the system administration teams. Take a drink. The developers started being responsible for deploying their own releases and answering and resolving after hours calls. So you broke it, you bought it. There were no longer anybody blocking speed to market. There was nobody angry at somebody else for making them work on a Saturday night. If you released something that wasn't quality, then you were the one who had to deal with it. So at that point, we started to make a push to mature all of the various products. At this point, we're numbering over 200 products to a point where we could get them into public cloud, AWS specifically, instead of on-prem. The ultimate goal of eventually closing down our data centers. Well, what we discovered was that public cloud was expensive for applications that were not explicitly designed for cloud native. Things needed to be highly fault tolerant, redundant, and ultimately deal with being ephemeral. You needed to be able to replace a failed node without a manual server configuration. Your applications needed to be able to deal with auto-scaling. You couldn't have shared cache, you couldn't maintain a persistent state. So once we realized that it was super expensive to run in public cloud when you didn't have applications that were built for the cloud, we pulled back some that were better suited to on-prem. So we've since started building multiple landing zones to allow for whatever the best tool for the job is. So we have Kubernetes on-prem, we have Kubernetes in AWS. Some applications are better suited for one over the other, and we make the appropriate landing zone for each application. So for example, if you have an Amazon specific coding in your application, such as using a Lambda, then you would be better suited for doing something on one of the Amazon landing zones. If you just have an application that is fault tolerant and reliable and is easily containerized, you might do it in Kubernetes, either on-prem or in AWS. But basically what the TechOps organization, the part of the team that I am, is our job is to help the development teams by allowing them to make informed decisions on where they would be better suited. as well as provide the tooling and the services to let them create things on their end. And what the goal is to allow them to code their infrastructure without having to know system administration end to end. They don't need to know the servers behind it. They don't need to know the load balancers behind it, and so on. So specifically, we're facilitating DevOps with our roles, either in the on-prem or the public cloud teams. And my team in particular is on-prem infrastructure. I'm particularly focused on a managed operating system, Linux operating system specifically, and we run configuration management and access controls. So now let me go into my experience as a woman in technology. Now that I've told you all about Ticketmaster, way more than you ever wanted to know, but now you know what's behind complaining when you're trying to buy your tickets and that's not quite going like you want. So my experience as a woman in technology, I have to confess here that I spent many, many years being a bad ally to women in tech. I felt that since I'd been able to do things by sitting down with some books and learning and shoving my way into a job, that everybody must have had the same experience as me. In the early 2000s, a lot of the women in tech organizations were centered around making a safe space for women to function in technology. And much like women's only gyms and women's only races were running, I was slightly offended and I felt a little bit of hostility that I didn't need a special place. I was just as good as the guys. I didn't need to be coddled. I could totally go head to head with one of the guys. And you figure in technology, if you go look at some of the boards, guys are mean to each other. I felt like I could deal with guys being mean to me just as much as guys could deal with guys being mean to each other. But after a while, I stopped being a jerk and actually paid attention. I witnessed some of the microaggressions that women experience. I witnessed the fact that men will come up with the same idea as a woman and be able to talk over them just because their voice is a little louder. I realized that women were being deterred from the field because it was not a pleasant environment. And then you throw in the sexual harassment like Krishna and Cynthia mentioned, and that further makes it a hostile environment. The other factor is that women are often skipped over for promotions because they don't necessarily speak out that they feel that they should, as a lot of that comes from confidence, and a lot of the confidence is lost because we don't have people to look up to who look just like us. We don't have people standing up on stage talking about how great things are that look like us. And it encourages people when they see role models that are very similar to them. So when I realized I was being a jerk, I started getting involved in the mentoring of the young ones. Started specifically with elementary and high school aged. I thought this would be a great place to start mentoring people before the biases set in, before the fear of somebody being better than them at something set in, and before their confidence was crushed. And as well, it helped me because it was easier for me to broach the topic. I didn't feel like I was forcing a safe space for women, that they needed something special. I was encouraging young people to get into technology. So I started mentoring with a group called Cyber Girls. They do a yearly competition for cybersecurity. And basically before the competition, they would do a kind of a speed mentoring type setup where the elementary and high school girls would rotate through a bunch of professional women, in various fields. For example, we had Cisco, we had Lockheed Martin. It didn't matter exactly what you did. You could be in marketing, et cetera, as long as you had some background in technology. So I started working with them, and I got to learn some really wonderful things talking to the girls when the girls were asking questions of us. And I got to see some backgrounds, I got to see some of their motivations, and as well, I got to offer my expertise and my experience with some of these motivations. So of course, working for Ticketmaster, I get the, hey, can you get me some Taylor Swift tickets? Can you get me some Beyonce tickets? And I'll say there, the girls are as bad as the adults. And the answer is no, I won't get you tickets. But what I started to get after that was questions like, how did you know you wanted to be in technology when you grew up? How did you get into the field? How did you get past any obstacles? And those questions gave me a unique perspective on young people and how they're trying to get into things. So my all-time favorite was a fourth grader who said, I want to be an electrical engineer. And I went, wow, that's a very, very specific STEM field. That is not something that you're going to get cred with the other kids, not something cool like I want to be in robotics so I can build scary monster robots. It was basically something that she had learned about, that she was interested in, and she wanted to proceed to learn it because she thought she would love it. I'll say I met Muriel at Girls in Tech, and I think when I met her, I told her this whole thing that I was like, oh, I don't believe in women in tech organizations. And, you know, unfortunately that organization shut down not too long after I met Muriel, but I've gone since to continue meeting with other groups to try to get involved, and not just with the young girls, but we're trying to spin up a chapter of Chick Tech in LA so that we can, it encompasses high school girls, career women, women trying to get into a technology career, and some social networking as well. But of course, COVID times has us not able to sit down and meet. And obviously that's a little bit on hiatus until we can get back into being able to meet in public. So with that though, I started also doing some mentoring events at Ticketmaster. We would bring in high school girls or young college women, and we would talk about our career trajectories. And this was interesting. It was always a thrill to talk to these bright young women. But when I talk to these bright young women, I am hit over the head with a 2x4 of imposter syndrome, because I'm saying, who am I to be able to tell these women how they should enhance their career? Who am I? Why would they be asking me this question? Because I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about. And I know imposter syndrome is a very common thing with women in various fields, women in technology in particular. And if you don't know what the definition of imposter syndrome is, it's feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evidence to the contrary. So you did something really great, but you say, oh, that was a fluke. I didn't mean for that to happen. That was just luck. It wouldn't happen again. Somebody's going to figure out that I'm a fraud. And all in all, it happens to both men and women. 70% of all people feel it at some point, whether it be in their personal life, in their social life, in their career life. But this is a career killer with women in a lot of cases, because in tech, we're less likely to apply for a job than a man is. There have been studies done on women's confidence that when we're applying for a job, we feel we need to be better trained than the average man guy does. He'll jump in if he's only got 60% of the qualifications. Whereas in a lot of cases, women won't even apply for the job unless they think they have 100% of the skills being asked for. They feel like they won't do the job well. They feel like they don't want to waste anybody's time on an interview with an unqualified applicant. But all in all, if you feel your skills need shoring up, then by all means, work on your skill. Never stop learning. You should always keep learning. Focus on your goal. Avoid discrimination by showing your sheer talent. If you're good at something, just show it off. And avoid the ever-present and insidious imposter syndrome. You can take, I don't know this thing that this other guy knows, use it as a learning opportunity. It is something that you don't know that you can enhance, not something that you are suffering a shortcoming because you don't know it. So the fact that you're here at this meetup for DevOps means that you're already ahead of the game. You are already trying to further yourself. You're already trying to learn more, and you are already trying to improve your network of people that are like you. So you want to realize the only person you need to be better than is yourself yesterday. The other benefit of being in tech is that it allows you to make midlife career changes. One of the things I reiterate when working with the girls, that if you go to school to be a doctor, a veterinarian, you want to be in marketing, you want to be a journalist like I did, it doesn't mean that you can't switch over into tech. It means that you now have a leg up. You have an additional piece of background, an additional selling point, because you could go into technology for medical if you wanted to be a doctor, and you now have this background of items that doctors would have to care about in technology. If you wanted to be a journalist and you went into technology, you now probably have better writing skills than the average person in technology, and that's a benefit as well. So you have an additional selling point as well as what you got out of school or whatever you got out of a coding camp or whatever. So finally, I'll close with a little bit of my, not quite close, but one last point here with Ticketmaster is one of the difficulties I've experienced, and it hasn't impacted me heavily, but it has made me stop and think about my role as one of the few women in technology. And I'll say Ticketmaster is trying to get a gender balanced workforce. There are women in leadership, in development, in database administration, project management. But you know what we have a shortcoming of? And it's not just us. It is women in technical operations. So the system administrators, the networkers, and so on. I would love to diversify my workforce, but women don't even apply. And this goes back to what I said about thinking that you need 100% of the skills. So I'll give a couple of examples here. We did a summit last winter with all of the tech ops organizations globally. The network administrators, the cloud engineers, the system administrators, and we all came to LA, 50 people. And you know how many women were in the group photo? Me, one. In my 25 years in working in tech, do you know how many women I've interviewed? One. You know how many women I've hired? One. And what we need to do is we need to change that. So I've got one last slide here. We need to change the profile of the technology sector. Tech itself is about disruption and change. It changes every day. We can be part of the ones to encourage this change. We need more women on stage, showing other women that they deserve to be up there too. We need more women in the door so that there's no intimidation factor of being the only woman on the floor. Well, it's nice to have my own bathroom. I don't want to be the only person using the women's bathroom. We need to uplift other women who are interested in technology or other STEM fields. We've got some kick-ass skills, and those that we don't have, we can easily learn as well as anybody else. And if you see a job you're interested in, go for the job. As a hiring manager, no one ever has 100% of the qualifications. Just try it. It can't hurt anything. And market yourself, make yourself heard, ask for a seat at the table, and always up-level your skills. If you find your love, always keep learning. Watch out for your own biases, which includes the imposter syndrome, and take every opportunity you're given to grow.